atmosphere. We spoke of was and
In the summer of 2014, I was bored out of my mind, and I was about to start my third and final year of high school, at the end of which I'd have to take my general secondary education exams, which are kind of like SET exams, as in your grades in them would determine if you could go to college or not, and if you could choose the field you're going to study. But unlike the SATs, you could only take them once, which for my young, dumb, naive teenage self was like a death sentence. Back then, I thought this was it. I only had one chance to make my life right. I could either get good grades, study medicine, and become rich and happy, or I could get poor grades, work a lousy job, and live with my parents till death. Boy, was I stupid back then. My biggest fear of this year, however, was not the manufactured existential danger that I convinced myself of, but rather the belief that I had to study all the damn time. I was so afraid that this year was going to be like living in prison, and I thought that I wasn't going to have the time to play, watch movies, read stuff, go out with friends, etc. And for that very reason, when it was only 3 weeks before the year would start, I decided I had to play a new game. Maybe a big franchise that I have never played before, and I thought that I had to have fun to the fullest with it, since my young, dumb, naive teenage self thought this was like maybe the last time I get to play games ever. But I only had enough money to buy one single game for my PlayStation 3, and that was when I stumbled upon the Legacy Collection for Metal Gear Solid. I had heard of the series before, and I had always been a bit skeptical of it. What I heard about the convoluted plot, the confusing timeline, all the damn snakes, and the stealth gameplay, which at the time I really sucked at, made me think that it wasn't really for me. Nevertheless, I found it on sale in a local shop and learned that it contained 5 whole games. 8 actually, if you count VR missions and the 2 original MSX games. So, after much debate with myself, I decided to give it a go. I bought it, sat down, started it, finished the entire saga in 2 weeks, and I fucking fell in love. I had never played anything like it before, and it quickly became my favorite video game series of all time. Playing Metal Gear Solid was an experience like nothing else. I had only 1 week remaining till the start of my 3rd year by the time I finished the series, and in that week, I read and watched every single video, article, or thread I could find that delved deep into the lore of the franchise, and I ended up getting a first-class ticket on the hype train of Metal Gear Solid V The Phantom Pain, and somehow I convinced my parents to give me the money to pre-order the game. When I say I rode the hype train, I really mean it. In the following year, I watched every single trailer and gameplay video that have been released for the Phantom Pain over and over again. I fantasized about the game day and night, and I even had dreams about it. I was thinking that this is it. This was going to be the game that will explain every single minor mystery and neatly tie up any loose ends left from the series. I thought the game was going to tell us the full detailed history of Big Boss. Kojima's promise that this game was going to be the missing link that completes the saga was like magic. It really made me think that I was going to play the ultimate video game. In short, I was ready to love this game, and if you had asked any MGS fan, they would probably have described a similar degree of hype for it. It was really insane how much people were anticipating this one title. But the year did not go well, and it wasn't because of school. My father passed away that year, and it was really hard for me. Despite that, I still got good grades, and I ended up studying pharmacy instead of medicine, but that's besides the point. Needless to say, I was hopelessly in need of a distraction, and Metal Gear Solid V would serve that role for me. It was the 27th of August, and I was in the middle of replaying the franchise, getting ready for the Phantom Pain. When the stars aligned, fate rolled the dice, and I got lucky. The game arrived 4 days earlier than it was supposed to. It was so unexpected, and it got me insanely excited that I literally jumped out of my chair and threw my controller at the wall unconsciously when my mom told me that the game was there. I fired it up immediately and started playing. Little did I know, I was in for one of the biggest disappointments of my life. If you ask a Metal Gear Solid fan about what happened with this game in the months following its release, They'd probably sigh deeply and tell you that it's a really long story. And it was. It was also insane. To say that a lot of people were disappointed with the story would be an understatement. It was reminiscent of the backlash Metal Gear Solid 2 got when it was first released, and maybe even for the same reasons, but in a vastly different context. Why were people disappointed with the Phantom Pain? It's simple, really. The trailers for the game made it seem like we were going to see Big Boss building Outer Heaven firsthand, like we were going to see him get the nickname Saladin and recruit Sniper Wolf, like we were going to see him meet Liquid Snake for the first time, and like we were going to learn everything there was about Grey Fox. It made it seem like we were going to truly witness the battle of wits between Zero and Big Boss unfold. But what we got instead really did not compare. What we got was a badly paced story with some cool ideas, some major plot holes, incomplete character arcs, a ton of unanswered questions, and an underwhelming finale for the saga. But worst of all, it was not Big Boss's story. Instead, it turned out to be the story of a random medic that was part of Big Boss's crew at some point. And while Kojima meant for that medic to be a stand-in for us, and for him to represent the role of us, the fans, in building the franchise and creating the mess of Big Boss alongside Kojima Productions, fans were not satisfied. Surely there had to be more. Surely there was something missing. Ironically, the game made players feel the very same thing it was named after. It made them feel a phantom pain. Naturally, the game sparked debate among fans, but for some parts of the fanbase, that debate quickly spiraled into an insane mess of conspiracy theories about a ruse of unparalleled magnitude in the history of video games. People, at some point, were convinced that Kojima was hiding something huge. They thought the rest of the game was hidden somewhere, buried underneath some secret in the game that players were yet to unearth. People thought Kojima was conducting some crazy social experiment to illustrate the dangers of hype, while hiding the real game somewhere for the worthy to find. It was so weird that it ended up spiraling into a strange mixture of Stockholm Syndrome and outright denial. People were legit enjoying being teased by Kojima, and they were enjoying the feelings of emptiness and pain that the game leaves you with. This video aims to chronicle the events that set that insanity in motion, and it aims to try and explain why people were ready to go to such lengths chasing a phantom. I would like for it to both serve as a somewhat comprehensive archive for an interesting part of video game history, and as a personal story about hype and obsession. An important goal that I will try to achieve is for the video to be a satisfying experience for both people who are unfamiliar with this whole thing and people who have been following it since day one. In the video, I will not be reviewing the Phantom Pain or criticizing its story. Rather, I will try and explore the timeline of these events, and will attempt to answer the questions of how and why it all happened. So, let's start at the beginning, shall we? It all began with the discovery of a simple title card. Okay, back up a little bit. Before we dive into the main events, there is something that I have to address first, and it's the, to use a somewhat benign term, unlikeliness of it all. I'll admit that all of this sounds incredibly delusional, or, at best, far-fetched. Kojima is hiding some real game behind a very well-kept secret, conducting a social experiment that requires perfect cooperation and secrecy of an ungodly amount of people. It all sounds rather tinfoily, to be honest. How on earth did some people think, me included, that this was in any way plausible, let alone possible? And to answer that question, we have to go back a little bit. If you look at Kojima's games and how they are usually advertised, one thing becomes abundantly clear. This man loves messing with his fans. Kojima was and still is infamous for pulling insane stunts when it came to how he decided to market his games. The man garnered a reputation of being somewhat of a prankster, a deceiver, or even a liar. But whatever you wanna call it, it was not unwarranted. Some examples of this include hiding the character of Raiden during the marketing of Metal Gear Solid 2, and never mentioning him. He went to such lengths to conceal his existence that he had his team swap Raiden's character model with Solid Snake's during trailers that featured events from the planned chapter, in order to trick players into thinking they were going to be controlling Solid Snake for the entirety of the game. Another example is that when he revealed Metal Gear Solid 4 for the first time, he made it look like a new FPS title, before revealing it was actually Metal Gear Solid 4 all along. I'm also kinda obligated by meme law to mention the "Did you like it" incident, where Kojima had Jade Raymond pretend to be revealing a new Assassin's Creed title before it turned out to be Metal Gear Solid 4 all along. Again. But perhaps the most infamous ruse Kojima managed to pull off was what he did with the Phantom Pain itself. And let me tell you that it was insane. What happened is that around 2012, people knew there was a Kojima game in the works for some time, but no one knew any concrete details on what the game was gonna be about. However, there was speculation that the game was gonna be an MGS title that follows up on Big Boss's story, which was confirmed when Kojima revealed Metal Gear Solid V Ground Zeroes for the first time in September of 2012, saying that it was the first chapter of the Metal Gear Solid V story. Later that year, in December, another game was revealed, a game called The Phantom Pain, which seemed like a new horror title. The game was supposedly being produced and developed by a new Swedish company called Moby Dick Studios, and directed by a man called Joakim Mogren. No one knew anything for sure about that game, and the trailers were edited in a style that was very different from the traditional MGS trailers, yet some people were not fully convinced. The protagonist of this new game looked an awful lot like Big Boss, and its title art contained empty spaces in which the phrase Metal Gear Solid V would fit perfectly. Still, Kojima went all in on the ruse, to the point where he hired an actual actor to play the role of the mysterious Swedish developer. And in March of 2013, in preparations for the big reveal, said actor conducted an interview with Jeff Keighley, who was actually in on it, where it was pretty much confirmed that the Phantom Pain is in fact Metal Gear Solid V, since the Fox Engine logo appeared in the game's screenshots. And finally, the game was revealed for real to the public in a debut trailer. But it did not stop there, as that very trailer actually kind of spoils the game's big twist, but it does so in a way that you would not notice until you've finished the game, proving once again that Kojima is, if nothing else, a master troll. Actually, for good measure, let's also tell the tale of the fabled demo, known as PT, since PT will become very relevant later in this video. During Gamescom of 2014, another horror IP was announced at Sony's conference. The game was supposedly being developed by a new studio called 7780s Studios. Yeah, it wasn't a very convincing name in retrospect. Anyways, the game was announced to be available as a demo on the PlayStation Store, and some people downloaded it, played it, finished it after shitting their pants, just to be greeted with a debut trailer for a new Silent Hill game directed by Hideo Kojima and none other than Guillermo del Toro, the popular and quite talented film director. Specifically, the first player to ever finish the demo was Soapy Warpig. Her reaction to it is priceless, and it's linked in the description. This story in particular is pretty interesting, not because of how insane and elaborate the deception was, and it certainly was both, but because it was very strange that Konami signed off on this ruse, that could have taken a week, according to Kojima himself, to get to the grand reveal, instead of immediately capitalizing on the media attention Gamescom inevitably garners. This too will become relevant later, so make sure to put a pin in it. And finally, before we get to the point of all these stories, there is one final thing that I should talk about, which is what players had to do to really finish Kojima's PSP game, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. It's a spin-off of Metal Gear Solid, but it's part of the main events, and the game has two endings, one of which is the final canonical ending that you need to know in order to be able to understand the story of the following two Metal Gear Solid titles. But how you got to that ending was honestly kind of fucked up. You had to grind for hours in order to upgrade your mother base and your bipedal nuclear warhead carrying walking tank, Metal Gear Zeke. I personally remember replaying the same mission 27 times in a row in order to extract enough soldiers to level up my intel team. Then you had to play 5 search missions looking for the escaped Zadornov, and then you had to play a final 6th mission that's very well hidden. Too well hidden, in fact, because you literally had to randomly stumble upon him if you happened to decide to play a target practice mission, which you certainly didn't have any reason to do at that point in the game. And doing that would unlock a final mission with the hardest boss fight in the game, which finally leads to the real ending. It was a bit too much, and it got some deserved backlash, but Kojima did it anyway. Again, the man is a big troll. He does not just do it to stand out or make a scene. This is how he operates. This is how he simply is. He enjoys messing with people's expectations and pulling crazy marketing stunts just for the sake of it. So, what's the point of all this? Why am I telling you some random stories about Kojima's marketing style? Well, because it's damn fun to do so, but also because understanding Kojima's weird history of marketing stunts and his way of trolling the players is integral to somewhat justify what happened with this game. People believing that some huge conspiracy was underway with the Phantom Pain makes slightly more sense when you factor in what those people saw from Kojima in the past. If you're someone who's experienced Kojima's deceptions firsthand, I believe you would have an easier time buying into a grand conspiracy theory about how a real game was somehow perfectly concealed, that not even a single player managed to find it for months on end after the game was released. You would have an easier time believing that Kojima hid an entire huge chunk of content behind some ridiculous conditions that players first had to meet. If you factor in the stuff I talked about, and the obvious incompleteness of the story, and some weird and cryptic news pieces and tweets given by various people who worked on the Phantom Pain, both before and after its release, which will come into play later, you might be able to understand how perfectly reasonable people might come to an outlandish conclusion such as, there is a big ruse and everything is a lie. I'm not trying to justify, for lack of a better term, the outlandish ideas that people came up with, because in retrospect, I have to admit that it was all rather illogical, but I'm trying to illustrate how it was even possible for such a conclusion to be reached in the first place. In simpler terms, it's pretty clear that something like this is really unlikely, if not outright impossible. But if someone were to decide to plan and execute a ruse of such scale and magnitude, that someone would most certainly be Hideo Kojima. So what happened exactly? That's what I will delve into the next part of this video. As stated before, this part of the video will cover the actual events that led to the Ruse theory emerging and subsequently gaining as much traction as it did. I decided to structure this part of the video as a timeline of events for two main reasons. The first is to have it serve as a well-documented coverage of what happened, because I don't think anyone has done that yet, at least not that I'm aware of. And the second is to enable anyone watching who wasn't aboard the Ruse cruise, as it came to be called, to have a clear picture for the chronology of events, how and when everything took place. This part will be slightly long and maybe not that interesting for some of you, so feel free to skip to the next chapter. It's not impossible to understand without it, but for the sake of completeness, I personally would recommend against it. But anyways, without further ado, let's dive in. April 15th, 2010. In an interview, Kojima states that his new project will challenge certain taboos, and that if he messes it up, he'd have to leave the industry. This sounded like Kojima was just planning a game with some controversial elements in it, but it will come into play later, so keep it in mind. April 28th, 2010. Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker is finally released, and around a month or two after that, most Metal Gear fans managed to finish it. The game is mostly well received, both critically and commercially, with the catch that the game sparks some controversy over being a PlayStation Portable exclusive, and some backlash over the absurdity of how players got to truly finish it. Peace Walker is relevant here for the latter reason and for the speculation that inevitably followed its release on the next Kojima game, and whether or not it was going to be a Metal Gear Solid title. Both of these aspects of discourse, in my estimation anyway, played a role in shaping the atmosphere that would later give rise to the Ruse series. June 2nd, 2011. Konami releases demo footage of their new and in-development Fox engine, which showcased the astonishing visual capabilities of the engine. The demo footage takes place in a jungle, and later this would come to be recognized as an early version of the Angola Zaire region featured in the Phantom Pain. August 17th, 2011. Kojima publishes images on Twitter that further showcase the engine's capabilities. It becomes clearer now that Kojima Productions were developing a game using the new engine, but no other major details are revealed. This further ignites the speculation in Kojima's next project, and Kojima adds fuel to the fire on December 20th, 2011. CNN, of all people, publishes an interview with Kojima, where he reveals he's currently working on a very open-ended game that would feature a huge amount of content and a very open experience for the player. He reveals that images he published on Twitter on the 16th were test images of his upcoming project, and finally calls it Project Ogre. Put a pin in that name because it will become very relevant later on. The speculations ran wild, since no one knew whether or not this was actually going to be a Metal Gear Solid game, and Kojima was mainly responsible for this, as he said that what he's working on was quite different from what his team did previously while working on Metal Gear Solid. March 2nd, 2012. On March 2nd, a Kojima Productions website titled Development Without Borders releases images showcasing the lightning abilities of the Fox engine. And previously, in February of the same year, the site was starting to promote the development of a new Metal Gear Solid title, simply referred to as the next Metal Gear Solid, with not much info on it. This, however, did not kill the debate that Project Ogre was still not MGS, but rather something totally new. Again, mainly because of Kojima's quote on Project Ogre being different. June 20th, 2012. In an interview, Kojima confirms that the next big Metal Gear Solid title is indeed Metal Gear Solid 5, and that it will be developed using the Fox engine. However, Kojima does not give any info on whether or not this Metal Gear Solid was related to the mysterious Project Ogre. Regardless, this led to the speculation dying down for a while, as most people just assumed, correctly if I might add, that Project Ogre and Metal Gear Solid 5 were indeed one and the same. August 30th, 2012. Kojima announces Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes in celebration of the franchise's 25th anniversary, and 2 days later, on September 2nd, and during PAX Prime 2012, the first trailer for Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes is released. Kojima says that this game is not the Metal Gear Solid 5, but rather a prologue for it. No other major details are revealed at the time, and again, people are becoming more and more convinced that this game is Project Ogre. But Kojima loves him a good troll, as we mentioned, and so on. September 3rd, 2012. On his Twitter account, Kojima says that Metal Gear Solid Zeroes is not Project Ogre, saying that ogres do not appear in the trailer. Naturally, this fuels the debate on what Project Ogre exactly is once again, and by extension, most people assume that Project Ogre is not Metal Gear Solid 5, since the Project Ogre is also not the Prologue. This, however, turned out to be a somewhat intentionally deceptive statement from Kojima, who meant it in the sense that Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was Project Ogre, but not Ground Zeroes. However, people did not take it that way. Put a pin in that too. December 10th, 2012. During the Video Game Awards of 2012, a trailer for a supposed new IP is released. The new game is titled The Phantom Pain, and the trailer claims it's made by a Swedish developer called Moby Dick Studios and directed by a man called Joakim Mogren. Interesting name, isn't it? Well, people were quick to deduce that Joakim was just an anagram of Kojima's name, while Mogren had a special meaning as well, since if you remove the first and last letters from it, it becomes Ogre, which was the Phantom Pain's code name during development. Of course, we all now know that this was indeed Metal Gear Solid V itself, although at the time, no one but Kojima Productions, Jeff Keighley, and a handful of Konami executives knew it. The trailer tries to frame the game as a mystery horror title. However, the community quickly picks up on the fact that the graphics resemble what we saw from the Fox engine, and that the protagonist of this game looks like Big Boss, and the title seems to be designed to fit the phrase Metal Gear Solid V. People are not ready to buy Kojima's bullshit anymore, and the speculation focuses on this instead of Project Ogre for a while. March 15th, 2013. Jeff Keighley conducts an interview with Joakim Mogren, or rather the actor hired to play him, pretending to be showing off images from his new game, when the Fox engine logo accidentally appears in one image, basically confirming that the Phantom Pain and Metal Gear Solid 5 are indeed one and the same game. March 27th, 2013. Kojima finally drops the pretense and confirms that the Phantom Pain is his creation during GDC 2013. He also reveals a new trailer for Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, basically confirming all theories on it. He explains that Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain are two parts of the Metal Gear Solid V experience, where Ground Zeroes would serve as a prologue and the Phantom Pain would be the full game itself. Kojima also explains that he pulled this stunt in order to assess people's reactions to the Fox engine without bias, which is a claim that naturally no one really buys. It's also confirmed at that time that Ground Zeroes will be released as a standalone title, which got some backlash, but that was nothing compared to what happened when the game actually released, but this comes later. June 6, 2013. Kojima announces that renowned Snake voice actor David Hayter would not be returning to play Snake in the Phantom Pain, opting instead to hire action star Kiefer Sutherland of 24 fame for the part, and citing the game's more serious tone and heavy themes such as race and revenge as reasons for the replacement. David Hayter doesn't take that replacement lightly, as revealed in interviews he conducted later on. The decision is met with controversy, as everything surrounding this game seems to do. Put a pin in that as well. June 13th, 2013. After the Red Band trailer for the game is released, and during an interview with Polygon, Kojima reveals that the game is going to follow an episodic structure, divided into missions which would serve as episodes in a larger story. This trailer and Kojima's comments following it sparked much debate among the fanbase, because the game seemed to tackle very sensitive subjects, but also because the open episodic structure felt almost alien to the Metal Gear Solid series, which has always been linear. It also sparked debate because of the character of Quiet and her revealing outfit, which Kojima addressed later, saying players would regret viewing her as sexualized once they play the game. January 7th, 2014. Kojima publishes an image on Twitter of a staff meeting saying that it's a meeting for a super secret project. It was never revealed what this project actually was, but knowing what we know now, it probably was a meeting for the cancelled Silent Hills title, although some people took it to mean something very different. February 4th, 2014. Game Informer publishes a report on Metal Gear Solid V, revealing that Ground Zero's main mission only takes around 2 hours to finish, and that it contains very little content. This naturally leads to backlash among the fanbase, which Kojima addresses on Twitter by saying that the game isn't really about how long it takes to finish, but rather about how open-ended it is. He says that players are likely to get a lot of value from it despite the initial lack of content in its main story, but when the game releases, players find out that this claim doesn't really hold true. March 14th, 2014. Jeff Keighley interviews Kojima about his upcoming games and asks if Camp Omega, the secret military site where Ground Zeroes takes place, will make an appearance in the Phantom Pain. To which Kojima answers that the plans is for players who own Ground Zeroes to be able to play a different mission at Camp Omega in the Phantom Pain, and how this is something that's only possible through video games, both of which are direct quotes, by the way. This also becomes very relevant later on, so keep it in mind. However, we should move on to when the game actually releases on March 18th, 2014. Metal Gear Solid V Ground Zeroes is released, and controversy quickly ensues. Players find out that the main story takes only 1 or 2 hours to complete, and some players even manage to finish it in under 10 minutes, just by playing really well and without employing any speedrunning tactics. It's also found that completing the side missions along with the story only takes around 8 hours total. The backlash was huge, especially because the game cost $40 at release, which was too much for what people deemed to be just a glorified demo. You can watch Angry Joe's video on the subject to get a sense of how much people felt deceived by Kojima and Konami, and it was quite deserved, if I might add. It's also noteworthy to mention that Kojima actually claimed the Phantom Pain is going to be a huge game, to the point where he was afraid that players won't be able to finish it. August 12th, 2014. During Gamescom, PT is announced and released, and almost immediately garners much media attention, not only because of the reveal at its end, but also because it was an excellent game for a simple proof of concept. The game also had a level of detail that you really wouldn't expect from a demo or a playable teaser, as Kojima puts it. It's interesting that, to this day, no one really knows the exact steps needed in order to finish the game, despite almost everyone being able to finish it consistently. PT will become relevant later in this video, but what we need to know now is that it really shows to what length Kojima is willing to go in order to mess with people's expectations. Needless to say, people were super hyped for the Silent Hill reboot, and it's for reasons that are pretty obvious. September 18th, 2014. A teaser trailer dubbed a concept movie is released for the upcoming Silent Hills, which contained a little strange detail. One of the models shown in the trailer appears to be the same model for Chico's head, who's a prominent character featured in Peace Walker and Ground Zeroes. This would later form the crux of one crazy theory that I'll be discussing later. If nothing else, the trailer shows that the game had great potential, and it showed the uniqueness of the horror it would present its players with, which would only deepen the wound when April 28, 2015. Konami announces that Silent Hills has been cancelled, with no explanation as to why, or if the company still intends to publish new Silent Hill titles in the future. But it lined up perfectly with rumors that were starting to surface that claimed Kojima was leaving Konami right after he's done working on the Phantom Pain. Naturally, backlash ensues, and some fans even start a petition to somehow change Konami's mind, which in my estimation illustrates both how much this game was anticipated and how much its fan base was dedicated. All these efforts, however, would eventually prove futile, and we never got what could have been possibly the greatest Silent Hill game ever made. But it later started to become apparent that this cancellation was not just about Silent Hills. July 15th, 2015. Konami decides to remove Kojima's name from the cover art for Metal Gear Solid V. It becomes the only mainline entry in the franchise that does not bear the words "a Hideo Kojima game" on its covers. It seems like a bizarre move on Konami's part, and some people view it as somewhat petty. Nevertheless, this confirms the rumors that Kojima's relationship with Konami is getting rocky, and that him and his team would probably leave Konami by the end of the year. Some people start pointing to the Deja Vu mission found in Ground Zeroes, in which the player had to erase logos of past MGS titles that were directed by Kojima. A strange task which prompts Kaz to utter the infamous quote, "You might be able to erase the markings, but the memories will never disappear." And these people say Kojima was trying to warn us of what Konami was doing all along. Other people dismiss this entirely and say it's mere coincidence, and others still claim this is all part of a huge lie. In retrospect, the correct answer was obvious enough, but it wasn't as clear-cut back in the day. August 27th, 2015. Reviews for Metal Gear Solid V The Phantom Pain finally start to surface, and the game is met with what could only be described as overwhelming critical acclaim, since it garners an impressive 93 on Metacritic. But there is a catch. All the reviews released at the time were produced as a result of a Konami-sponsored review event known as a boot camp, where Konami basically gave critics 4 days and a total of 40 hours of playtime to finish the game and write the reviews. Players who were following the game's development closely were quite skeptical, since a 40-hour playtime is a bit strange when you recall that, as mentioned before, Kojima claimed he's worried players wouldn't be able to finish the game. After all, 40 hours is a mere small fraction of content when compared to other open-world games, such as The Witcher 3, which was released in the same year. September 1st, 2015. The game is finally released. Fans are positively brimming with excitement. It's quite ironic how disappointing some people found the game to be when the hype for it was that high. A lot of players quickly finish the game and find themselves longing for a real conclusion that's simply not there. September 12th, 2015. Data miners, as always, are eager to gut the game's files, and quickly discover evidence for the existence of a supposed third chapter that was apparently cut from the game, leaving nothing behind but a simple title card bearing the words Chapter 3 Peace. On its own, this could simply mean that the game had a third chapter planned at some point in time, but it was cut due to budget cuts and whatnot. And that would not be surprising, since all available evidence at the time pointed to the game's final development stretch to have been very rocky, with possible budget cuts, impossible deadlines, and the likes. But when combined with some of Kojima's interviews, the disjointed second and supposed final chapter of the game that contained more recycled missions that contained new content, Eli's cryptic, somewhat infamous catchphrase, "Never be game over," and the fact that Moby Dick, a novel the game was certainly influenced by, was initially released missing its epilogue, causing readers to rate it very negatively at first. All of this prompted some people into coming up with a far-fetched but sort of plausible idea that maybe Kojima is pulling some sort of crazy stunt. The logic went something like that. Maybe there's some hidden content that players needed to unlock in some ridiculous fashion, in the same vein as unlocking Peace Walker's real ending was. This theory quickly starts gaining attraction, and so on. September 20th, 2015. A Reddit user by the name of Nuclear Snake publishes a post on the r/Metal Gear Solid subreddit, detailing his theory on how a hidden, possibly unlockable third chapter is a feasible idea, and that we, the players, just need to figure out how to unlock it. Nuclear Snake then creates a subreddit dedicated to just that idea, named after an infamous phrase found on Liquid Snake's shirt from the game, "Never be game over." It quickly garners much traction, and becomes the place to discuss conspiracy theories about Kojima, Konami, and the Phantom Pain. This is where the real story begins, and that, certainly, was the most significant chapter of my experience with the Phantom Pain. If the aim of the first chapter of this video is to provide a backdrop for the events that I'm about to explain, and if the aim of the second chapter is to present a reasonably detailed timeline of events leading up to the spark that was r/NeverBeGameOver, then the aim of this chapter is to chronicle some of the most significant theories and events that ensued in the following months, and how, for some people, me included, a fun and somewhat bizarre conspiracy theory about a video game turned into an obsession that took over their lives over months. There is something that I'd like to mention before we delve into this story. While my goal with this chapter is to present a somewhat cohesive chronology of events like I did in the last one, this chapter is not going to follow the timeline structure of chapter 2, because I would like for that part to be told as a personal story about how that obsession grew, and what my experience with it was like, just as much as I would like for it to be an accurate retelling of events. So, the events I retell might not be presented in a strictly chronological order. Okay, so, I finally finished the Phantom Pain on the 3rd of September, and initially I thought it was brilliant. With the amount of hype I had for it, how could I not? I was blown away by how obvious the twist ending was in retrospect, and how it utterly and completely managed to fool me. The game literally starts with you creating the character you're gonna spend nearly 50 hours playing as, and yet somehow manages to trick you into believing you're still gonna be playing as Big Boss himself. It makes you live a lie that's not very different from the lie your character lives within the game itself, since, ironically, Venom Snake was also tricked into believing himself to be the real Big Boss. It wasn't long before frantic debates about the game's story started between me and some of my friends who finished it around the same time. And I started noticing that with each passing day, all of us were feeling the pain more and more, and were becoming more ready to accept that the game was simply not what we wanted. We finally all agreed that this game's story was underwhelming at best, and a disappointing mess at worst. We started considering all of the possible explanations for how the game's story turned out the way it did, and online discussions that claimed it's possible there is more content to unlock fueled our own discussions, until we talked ourselves into thinking that maybe Kojima was running some grand ruse with this game. This was when one of my friends found an interesting website called inksock.org. Named after the newspeak term used to describe the governing party's ideology in Orwell's 1984, which the Phantom Pain heavily draws inspiration from, inksock.org was a simple website, containing nothing but a countdown that would end on the 12th of September, a creepy picture, and the words Black Hound, At least that's what it appeared to be on the surface. But if you digged a bit deeper and tried inspecting the website using any web browser available, you would find cryptic phrases within its source code, containing references to Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, and BT. We started treating these as riddles to solve, and started picking apart every single one of what we thought were clues that we could find on the website. Naturally, my friends and I kept checking the website almost daily, patiently waiting for the countdown to be over, thinking that maybe something big related to the Phantom Pain would be announced, since that, for some reason, we had decided that the website was probably legit and somehow related to Kojima. And on the 12th, when the countdown was finally over, the website displayed an image simply saying, "There was a countdown here. It's gone now." Saving the image to your computer would reveal its name file, lie.png. Clicking the image would redirect people to the change.org petition that people created in order to convince Konami to revive the cancelled Silent Hills. And the countdown was a lie. We were fooled. We went insane for a little bit, and in a couple of days the site started redirecting visitors to another website, which apparently was a website for an upcoming indie horror title. It became clear that this was most likely a developer who was trying to steal some of the hype surrounding the Phantom Pain for their own upcoming game, or just a classic internet troll. Which is made more likely by the fact that a little bit later, insec.org became nothing more than a chat room, apparently dedicated to discussing the mysteries in the Phantom Pain's story. This experience was a huge disappointment for me, because I somehow tricked myself into believing that a website that, in retrospect, was an obvious troll from the start, was part of some stunt Kojima was pulling, and despite that, somewhat ironically, being sorely disappointed was a spark that ignited my hope for more, and my faith that it was all possible. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon the r/NeverBeGameOver subreddit, and I was ecstatic to discover that some people not only agreed with me that the game is unfinished and anticlimactic, but some of them even used the exact same words I often use to describe what I thought of the ending. It's making me feel a phantom pain. I was so excited that, in fact, the only reason I created my very first Reddit account was to be able to participate in this subreddit and follow its newest theories and updates. So we're at a point in time where people are flirting with the idea that maybe Chapter 3 exists, and maybe we can unlock it. The general atmosphere is one of careful optimism, and people are coming up with all sorts of different ideas on how we can unlock the third chapter. Some of them are plausible, and others less so. Naturally, there was resistance and skepticism from day one. Of course there was, because the idea was still kinda crazy. The skeptics asked, is Kojima so insane that he would hide the rest of his last Metal Gear Solid title this well, risking his fans never finding it? To which the believers answered, he did it before with Peace Walker. The skeptics asked, do you really think it's plausible that Konami would sign off on a stunt that's risky for both their profits and reputation? To which the believers answered, well, they signed off on PT, did they not? And the skeptics asked, is Kojima willing to plan and execute a ruse of this scale just to run some social experiment? To which the believers answered, of course he is. Plus he said he's planning something that may force him to leave the gaming industry if it fails. What else could he mean? Long story short, the skeptics were quickly shut down, and the discussions on NeverBeGameOver ensued. People started pointing out all of the plot holes and inconsistencies found in the game's story, such as Skullface's cryptic comment to Venom Snake about the final sample of the vocal cord parasite being very close to you, or the existence of large containers bearing the Diamond Dogs logo in enemy camps with no explanation. They started discussing how disjointed and lacking in structure the second and supposed final chapter of the game was, given that it lacks an actual plot and is mostly comprised of repeated story missions on a higher difficulty with very little new content. They pointed out how apparently fully finished cutscenes that were in the trailers never made it into the game's final release. And all of these people came to the conclusion that we had to find out what all this meant, and had to figure out a way to maybe unlock some of the game's secrets. At the time, the subreddit could be divided into three main camps. A camp that thought the game's third chapter exists in the game as it is, and can be unlocked if we tried hard enough. A second camp that thought the game's third chapter does exist but was not even in the game yet, and could only be added through a future patch that Kojima and Konami would release once we figure out some riddle or clue left by them. And the final camp included people who thought we were all a bunch of lunatics, but were both too polite and having too much fun watching people chase phantoms that they never said it out loud. Instead, they just lurked around and enjoyed the ride. I was in the first camp, mostly because I was not willing to accept that we had to wait for a patch to unlock the game's secrets, and instead wanted to do something about it right away. Admittedly, we didn't have much to go on, so the members of the first camp started experimenting with the game, trying a bunch of random actions that seemed like they may unlock something, even if that something wasn't the actual third chapter. They tried interrogating Ocelot, blasting the truth tapes that reveal Venom Snake's real identity through speakers around Mother Base soldiers to see if it would elicit a reaction, fully exploring every nook and cranny on Mother Base hoping to find something new, because they thought maybe there was some more stuff like Paz's secret side quest, and fully leveling up every Mother Base platform, thinking that maybe we had to go the Peace Walker route again. All of this to no avail. Eventually, some people started suggesting that maybe we were looking in the wrong place, maybe even the wrong game. They came forward with the idea that maybe, since it was discovered earlier that Ground Zeroes adds a copy of its save file inside the Phantom Pain save file, we needed to do something in Ground Zeroes rather than the Phantom Pain in order to unlock whatever there was to unlock. It seemed plausible at the time, especially since it lined up with Kojima's claim that players would be able to revisit Camp Omega. So they tried again, this time within Ground Zeroes to unlock the game's secrets. And again they reached the dead end. Nothing much came of it, but then some people said maybe the answer lied in PT, not Ground Zeroes. Because, for reasons that I frankly don't quite understand, some people were certain that PT was not a real game, but rather just another lie, and was in fact a coma nightmare Big Boss was having. And their evidence? Chico's model and the fact that PT's pause menu had some visuals that resembled a brain X-ray. That's it. I told you it got insane. Obviously nothing much came of any of the things we tried, but the most promising avenue seemed to be what was known at the time as the Demon Snake Run. Basically, some people reasoned that, according to the game's marketing, the story was supposed to be about men turning into demons, the biggest demon of them all being Big Boss himself. But the actual game had nothing of the sort. The Big Boss we played as was a soft man who spared lives, rescued animals, and took care of children. But what if we had to do the demon part ourselves? The game had a hidden karma system. Well, a half-hidden one. It was known that when you managed to finish a mission without being detected and without killing people and other stuff in the same vein, you would gain heroism points. But what was less known, because the counter for it was completely hidden from the player, is that if you killed people or committed acts of evil, you would start gaining demon points instead. And gaining these points seemed to slowly change Venom's appearance so that it resembled a demon. The shrapnel stuck in his skull would grow out, looking like a horn, and his body would always be covered with blood, becoming red. In short, this is how the game lets you turn into a demon. But what if we made a run through the entire game as Demon Snake? Maybe this was the key to unlocking something. People started testing it out, despite the run being something that required tremendous effort, since it was not easy turning into a demon. It took a lot of demon points, but people were dedicated enough that they tried, and that too failed to achieve anything but your character looking like they need a shower during cutscenes. I was starting to lose hope, facing dead end after dead end, but I was not ready to give up yet. Never be game over, Liquid Snake has taught me. So I kept researching, brainstorming with friends, and the subreddit was hard at work as well, especially the second camp I mentioned. So I turned to that. I started discussing what Kojima's cryptic interviews might really mean, and what the strange hints from people who worked on the game might be referring to, such as Donna Burke, the singer who famously performed Sins of the Father, because she once published a picture of a script she was apparently recording that had Chapter 3 written on top. In short, I turned to the second camp in hopes of finding answers. Members of the second camp were focused on decoding what they believed were hints from Kojima and the game's development team, and patiently waiting for something to be announced. They came up with a lot of theories, and while some of them were pretty far-fetched, such as the weirdly popular theory about the surgeon who performs plastic surgery on Venom Snake in order to make him look like Big Boss, and who bore an uncanny resemblance to a real-life Italian surgeon known as Sergio Cannavaro, a surgeon that became famous due to his claims that he was going to perform the first human head transplant on an alive patient. Some people were suggesting that the surgeon is not really a real person and instead was a character created by Kojima as part of his grand ruse. Or like the theory that proclaimed the Phantom Pain was actually never made by Kojima, but rather was made by what was dubbed a Phantom Studio, and the real game is hidden and planned to be released later on. Proponents of the theory claimed that this is why Kojima insisted on calling it MGS-V rather than MGS5, and that this is the real reason behind removing his name from the covers and David Hayter not coming back to play his iconic role. Perhaps even the real reason behind his Moby Dick studio stunt, because they thought maybe Kojima only did this to plant the idea of a fake studio in our minds, thus giving us a hint. It was their claim that V was the story of Venom Snake and that we would later get 5, the real story of Big Boss. In retrospect, the theories people came up with being this outlandish should have been reason enough for me and frankly for everyone to not believe that there is a ruse at all. But it was becoming an obsession that grew stronger by the minute, and the obsession had the benefit of serving as a coping mechanism with the feelings of being let down by the game. But some other ideas were a little more plausible, and if I go through all of them, this video could easily turn into a 5-hour beast. So instead, I wanna explain 2 ideas I think were significant enough that they garnered the most attention on the subreddit. The first one is what we can refer to as the Blue Ogre, Red Ogre theory, which is a theory that actually started coming into play quite a bit earlier than all the Chapter 3 stuff. The idea started surfacing around 2014. Back then, it was theorized that the game was nicknamed Project Ogre during development as a reference to a Japanese folklore tale known as the Tale of the Blue Ogre. Basically, it's about a red ogre and a blue ogre who were friends. The red ogre had always wanted to play with children living in a nearby village, but due to being an ogre, the children feared him and never wanted to play with him. The blue ogre then suggests a solution. He would pretend to attack the children so that the red ogre can pretend to save them from the evil blue ogre. And it works. The red ogre becomes popular among the children and finally becomes their friend. Later on, when the red ogre wants to spend time with his blue friend, he finds out the blue ogre left, as not to raise the children's doubts. In the process of gaining the children's approval, the red ogre lost his best friend, and it leaves him devastated. At the time, the community thought analyzing this tale would possibly reveal some of what the Phantom Pain story was gonna be about, especially that one of the game's infamous taglines, "From Fox, 2 Phantoms were born," seemed to possibly hint at this idea, if you were willing to believe that the Phantom was actually meant to substitute Ogre in this context. And the main idea was that the tale was supposed to serve as an allegory to the relationship between Big Boss and Skullface, or even Big Boss and Zero. And in retrospect, this wasn't exactly wrong, albeit with a small caveat. It was really about the relationship between Big Boss and Venom Snake, a character people didn't really know existed at the time. But members of NeverBeGameOver thought this possibly had an alternative interpretation, which is that the Blue Ogre and Red Ogre were actually meant to refer to Konami and Kojima. Konami would play the role of the Blue Ogre, making the children, who in this context represent the fans, angry and devastated, which makes them side with the Red Ogre, who represents Kojima. The main reason this theory became as popular as it did is because it seemed to fit perfectly with ideas Kojima has expressed in the past in some capacity, mainly how media and disinformation can make people believe anything, which is somewhat of a dominant theme from the Metal Gear Solid series. I mean, it makes its main appearance in Metal Gear Solid 2, where part of the game's story was about internet censorship and spreading false information. People reasoned that Kojima maybe was running a social experiment that would show what false news can do to such a dedicated fanbase. You hype them up greatly for a game, then you release the game underwhelming and unfinished, and amidst all of this, you start making Konami look like the bad guy. and the anger turns towards them for forcing the developers to finish the game earlier than they wanted. As outlandish as all of this seems at first, it felt very reasonable at the time, because Kojima had once said that Metal Gear Solid 5 was not really Project Ogre, and that Project Ogre is the one with ogres in it, and maybe that was never meant to be taken literally. Kojima also added fuel to the fire when he started talking about Volume 3, Chapter 3, or Episode 3 of other works of fiction, culminating in a somewhat infamous tweet that's currently shown on screen. The talk about a missing Season 3 that can't be found anywhere and the blue and red motif were what sold me on this idea, and in my haste I did not do my proper research at all, so it all seemed to fit perfectly. But nothing came of this as well, and we failed chasing another Phantom, since a couple of weeks later Kojima announced he found Chapter 3 of the show, confirming he was really just trying to watch a show he liked and nothing more. And a friend of mine pointed out that this whole thing is probably just referring to how Venom Snake was forced to take the heat and become the public face of Big Boss, while the latter hid and built his haven in Zanzibar land. I was disappointed yet again. But the second theory is the more significant one, so let's talk about that. I would call it the Portopia tapes, and buckle up, because this one's kind of wild. So you know the MSX, the popular machine that witnessed the birth of the Metal Gear series? Well, it had something of an interesting feature. One of the media storage methods it was compatible with was cassette tapes, and this is relevant because some of the games published for it were stored on cassette tapes. One of these games is the Portopia serial murder case, in which players took control of a detective known only as Boss, investigating a murder mystery alongside their partner, where the player character is mostly silent and the partner is the one who does most of the legwork. The game was a great influence on Kojima, as per his own admission, and its story is actually relevant to this theory as well, and this will become clear later on. But what's more relevant is something actually found within Ground Zeroes, and it's quite interesting to say the least. Let me explain. In both Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, players could collect and unlock cassette tapes that they can listen to, and these tapes often contained very important story details and information. But one of these tapes, found in a Ground Zero side mission and known as classified intel data, was a bit different. You couldn't really listen to it, since doing so would only yield white noise, because it's actually an MSX data tape. And it says so in the game itself. Naturally, when this whole Ruse debate started, people tried picking apart the tape, trying to figure out what it is, because it was never figured out, and because the Phantom Pain ends with Venom Snake inserting a similar tape into a Sony SDC 500 loader, presumably containing information about Operation Intrude N313. It was quickly found out that the tape actually contained some modified data for the Portopia serial murder case, specifically Volume 1 of the game's data. At first, this seems like a subtle way of paying homage to a game Kojima loved, but people quickly pointed out that the story of Portopia is maybe worth factoring in, because the player character is called Boss, is often silent, much like Venom Snake in the Phantom Pain, and the game has a recurring visual motif of blue butterflies, which were featured heavily in the Phantom Pain's past side quest. More importantly, however, Portopia ends with the reveal that your partner turned out to be the real killer all along. Why is this last part relevant? Well, one of the Phantom Pain's more intriguing mysteries is that Code Talker once tells Venom Snake to keep eyes on Kazuhira, which is Kaz Miller's full name. Maybe we were meant to conclude that, much like the ending of Portopia, Phantom Pain's real ending would have Kaz betraying Venom Snake, or maybe even would have us finding out that Kaz was the one behind the attack on Mother Base 9 years ago. Again, it all seemed to fit. Remember that Kazuhira's name means peace in Japanese, same as the name of the supposed third chapter. Interestingly enough, the Japanese translation for the title card of Chapter 3 was not peace, but another word that would be more accurately translated as coexistence. People reasoned that it might have been changed as not to spoil the game's ending, but in any case, the tape appeared to be the key to unraveling this mystery, and people quickly got to work, attempting to load the tape into an authentic or emulated MSX hardware, hoping they would find something interesting, some vital clue to point us in the right direction. It was very promising, and I kept checking the subreddit for updates until the 1st of October 2015, when a member of NeverBeGameOver proclaimed they finally managed to successfully load the tape using an emulator. To this day, this post is actually still the most upvoted non-satirical post on NeverBeGameOver, and why wouldn't it be? It seemed to be the most significant progress anyone has made towards finding the answer, but later that day my hopes were shot down again, when people pointed out that the emulated tape was not the one found in Ground Zeroes, but instead a modified version of the original Portobia game, with the code found in the tape forcibly inserted into it. Thus, it didn't really have anything different from the original game. It was just another dead end, another phantom. And this coincided with me discovering a set of tapes in the Phantom Pain that revealed Kaz has been embezzling money from Mother Base to open his own burger chain. This is what Code Talker was most likely referring to. It's quite funny if I'm being honest, but I didn't find it very amusing at the time and didn't wanna accept that once again I was played like a damn fiddle. I started getting desperate and felt like there was no hidden mystery, or if there was, we would never figure it out. My hope was quickly dying down, and I started thinking that maybe I should drop this whole thing and focus on something more fruitful. But the phantom pain grew more and more, and my despair grew stronger. I did not want to give up, and so I turned to the final lead. People who are familiar with the Chapter 3 discourse will no doubt have noticed by now that I have been ignoring a quite frankly huge part of the story, and are probably wondering why. To them, I'd like to say that there is a reason that I kept this part for last. It's simply because I thought this part of the story was significant enough that it deserved to be told on its own, and because it would serve as a fitting segue for the final part of this video. So, what am I talking about exactly? Well, here goes. To this day, there is still a real and confirmed piece of content that's yet to be unlocked by players in the Phantom Pain, known as the Nuclear Disarmament event. What is that exactly, some of you may be asking? Well, simply put, the Phantom Pain had a multiplayer component besides Metal Gear Online 3, in which players would be able to create their own online counterpart to the game's mother base, known as a forward operating base. Players could invade each other's bases and try to sneak their way through each other's defenses, in order to steal resources or reach an FOB center without being caught. Each player would be able to fill their base with as much defense, manpower, and weaponry as their in-game resources allowed. And one of the many possible defensive options the game gave players was the ability to develop and store up to 4 nuclear missiles on their FOB, with each player being able to build up to 4 FOBs, making for a total of 16 possible nuclear missiles per player. This is where it gets interesting. You see, a player could steal a nuclear missile from another player's base, which there certainly was a huge incentive to do, since building these things was not cheap, and owning a nuclear weapon drastically increased the base's both offensive and defensive ratings, making it significantly harder to be invaded. So let's say you successfully managed to steal one of these missiles. The game then would present you with an interesting choice. You can either keep the missiles and all its benefits, or you could choose to destroy it, ridding the world of its dangers forever. Doing so would decrease the overall count of nuclear missiles on the game's servers. And what happens if that count reaches 0? Well, a frank but somewhat reductive answer is that we don't know for sure. In the 8 years since the game's release, the nuke count never reached 0 in a legitimate manner. More on that later. A longer, more detailed answer is that data miners discovered there was a hidden cutscene in the game's files that would serve as a third ending for the game, besides the Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 endings. And that cutscene was supposed to unlock once the nuke count reached 0. That ending is currently referred to as the Nuclear Disarmament ending, and despite being never officially unlocked, the cutscene is available on YouTube for all to watch. The ending was obviously the most promising avenue when it came to potentially unlocking Chapter 3 for 2 main reasons. The first being that it would be the sort of thing that Hideo Kojima would certainly do. After all, we're talking about the same guy who wanted BT's puzzle to last a literal week. The second being that it was the only officially confirmed piece of content that was yet to be unlocked by players. The idea that, unlocking Chapter 3 and the nuclear disarmament ending were one and the same goal was seeming more plausible by the minute, especially when players discovered that having a PlayStation Plus or an Xbox Live Gold subscription was not necessary for players to build or disarm nukes, suggesting that it's an integral part of the game, and thus Konami decided not to lock it behind a paywall. People who worked on the game added fuel to the fire by constantly hinting at that idea. The most blatant hint of which came when Robert Alan Peeler, Konami's PR manager, replied to a tweet that's since been deleted, which directly asked if the Phantom Pain's Definitive Edition, which was recently announced at the time, would contain the fabled Chapter 3, to which Peeler replied with the tweets you currently see on screen. It doesn't really get any more obvious than that. Quickly, people started focusing on disarming nukes on all the different platforms, and a group of players created a website that tracks the number of nukes active on each platform, called nukewatch.com. That website is actually still functional to this day. Things were seeming promising for a time, and everyone gets to disarming, culminating in the formation of r/Metal Gear Philanthropy, a subreddit focused on facilitating the seemingly insurmountable achievement. But due to human nature and how the internet operates, another opposing subreddit named r/Metal Gear Patriots is formed in response, whose stated goal is to build as many nukes as possible in order to prevent players from unlocking the nuclear disarmament event. This slows the whole process down to a crawl, but people keep trying, and things started to look promising again when the Game Awards 2015 comes around. Kojima was supposed to make an appearance that day to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, and as I mentioned, I was naturally a bit discouraged by the whole thing, because despite the hints by Konami staff and the advances made towards nuclear disarmament, this was still coming following a series of dead ends that forced me to stop following news about the game for a while, especially that Kojima was supposed to leave Konami by the end of the year. But on the day of TGA 2015, the nuke count suddenly started decreasing at a pace that was quite impressive. A friend of mine pointed this out to me, and in spite of my best efforts, I couldn't prevent myself from getting a little hopeful again. The nukes kept decreasing all day, and my friend managed to convince me that maybe, just maybe, the nuke count would reach 0 just on time for Kojima's appearance at the Game Awards, where he would probably make a huge announcement about Chapter 3. It was my fault, really, because fool me once, that's on you. Fool me more than 7 different times, well, you get the picture. But I couldn't stop myself, because, what if there was still something yet to come? I remember sitting in front of my PC's screen, holding my breath as excited as a child getting a new toy, watching the Game Awards stream and NukeWatch.com side by side, when Jeff Keighley appears to make a brief and bizarre announcement. Kojima would not be able to attend the Game Awards, since Konami did not allow him to travel and accept his award. It was the final nail in the coffin. I was angry and devastated, and maybe in denial. I did not want to believe that I was disappointed yet again, and did not want to accept that this time it might really be all over. The pain grew more, and I tried to stop thinking about the game and forget all about crazy internet theories. At this point, I simply had to. In the weeks to follow, Kojima's contract with Konami finally ended and he officially left, ending a 28-year-long employment. Not too long after, he announced he would be starting his own studio, and this was the wake-up call I needed to finally admit that all the news about friction between Kojima and Konami was exactly what it seemed. Signs of a worsening working relationship that probably led to the Phantom Pain being an unfinished mess due to a problematic development environment. And in June of 2016, Death Stranding was announced, and most of Kojima's fans collectively decide that focusing on his upcoming project was probably a more worthwhile investment of their time and effort. It seemed that, after all, there was no Chapter 3, no grand deception, and no hidden endgame. It is a ruse that wasn't there. There was only the cold reality of professional disagreements, budget cuts, development hell, and personal grudges. People were moving on. They were done chasing phantoms. It became clear that nothing was there to find. It also became clear that the man himself was ready to move on. And with that, the flames of my hope were extinguished, leaving nothing behind but warm ashes of lingering disappointment and bittersweet relief. I thought that I too was ready to move on and forget this whole thing. But the story does not end there. Peace Day never came. Paz says these words in her diary tapes found in the Phantom Pain to describe how she betrayed Big Boss and his crew 3 days before she could celebrate Peace Day with the very people she betrayed. But like so many quotes from that game, it also works perfectly to describe the situation with the nuclear disarmament event. Peace Day never came, and it is very possible that Kojima's plan, which was to get players around the world to cooperate and achieve peace, backfired and proved that there will always be people who sabotage others' goals, no matter how insignificant these may be, and even if they stand to gain nothing from it. Peace Day never came, and maybe it will never come, since it now appears that the goal Kojima set for his players might actually be impossible to achieve. Why is that? Well, in 2020, being bored during quarantine and having mostly put everything to do with Chapter 3 behind me, I decided to replay the Phantom Pain, since it felt that a fresh playthrough without all the hype and disappointments hanging over my head might give me a fresh perspective on it. And it did. When I replayed the game 5 years later after I originally finished it, for the first time, I found myself gaining a newly found appreciation for what the game is, rather than what it isn't, and being impressed with what it tries and succeeds to do, rather than being disappointed with what it doesn't. The fresh perspective really changed how I viewed this game, and showed me that the Phantom Pain is a great game about revenge and loss that's managed to maintain a quite impressive level of quality when factoring in its development conditions. But the story would not end without one final event, and I'm glad that I was actually there to witness it. On the 29th of July of 2020, right in the middle of me replaying the game, nuclear disarmament was announced to be finally achieved on the PlayStation 3. I was shocked and ecstatic. I couldn't believe it, and yet, for all intents and purposes, it seemed legit. It seemed that the insurmountable goal was finally overcome via the collective efforts of thousands of dedicated players. I was excited to see if it would unlock anything special, or if Konami and Kojima would acknowledge it. But it wasn't long before Konami deemed the achievement illegitimate, since they claimed their investigations showed the event was achieved through hacking, and the players who unlocked the final event were banned from the game instead of being praised for the achievement they made. Peace Day never came, and it has now been just short of 8 years since the game was released. It seems that we may never know for sure what legit nuclear disarmament would look like, since the group that was working to achieve disarmament at the time came forward admitting they did cheat. But they said they only did it because the game's servers had cheaters on the other side, who used hacking to make their nukes invincible. It was a fighting fire with fire kind of thing. And it's true. There exists proof that cheaters have nukes on the game's servers that do not belong to any of OB, and thus are impossible to disarm. The strange thing is, Konami never admitted to the existence of these phantom nukes, and they don't seem to be willing to fix the issue. I can't help but wonder if this is one final act of pity on Konami's part, made with the goal of spiting Kojima and foiling his vision just one final time. Peace Day never came, and the only thing I can think of after years of data mining failed to prove the existence of any hidden content that would explain all the hints and teasing, especially Alan Peeler's tweet, is that maybe once nuclear disarmament is unlocked through legitimate means, the Chapter 3 title card would finally appear, but with no new content added to the game. It would just be a symbolic gesture of the peace that players managed to achieve, but even that would be 8 years too late. Peace Day may never come, and some people seem to not be able to accept that fact, because there are some people who, to this day, are still active on r/NeverBeGameOver, and they're still grasping at straws, trying to come up with theories that would tie everything together, from PT to Death Stranding, no matter how far-fetched these theories may be. But why? Why would people still believe, or even attempt to believe, that something is still out there? Most fans have moved on and are now simply excited to try Kojima's next project. Kojima has moved on and is now running his own studio with full creative freedom. Even Konami has moved on and are now remaking some of their most successful titles. So why can't some people just put it behind? To tell you the truth, I can't really speak for everyone. I don't know why there are people who still believe, or how they're still able to convince themselves of a ruse that has no evidence. But I can speak for myself, as a person who once had complete faith in the existence of a hidden and unlockable Chapter 3. I can tell you that the time the game was released was a turbulent period of my life, with my father passing away, me starting college, and everything around me changing, and I can tell you that my hype, mixed with the empty feeling I had in my soul, made me imagine a game that was impossibly good, impossibly big, and impossibly ambitious. A game that would fill that void and then some. I can tell you that despite Kojima himself once proclaiming that video games can never be art, the Metal Gear Solid series is still some of the best art out there. So I was attached to it to a degree that not many other works of fiction could achieve. The series meant so much to me, and as a result, I was ready to believe anything that would mean its final game did not turn out to be an unfinished and unsatisfying story. While I can't say for sure that this is how everyone felt about the situation, I can say with almost complete certainty that there are people who feel the same way I do, and who kept trying and trying to unlock this Phantom chapter just to avoid accepting that the Phantom Pain was never gonna be the game they imagined. Peace Day never came, and it has been almost 8 years since I first joined r/NeverBeGameOver. In retrospect, despite all the dead ends and the disappointments, despite all the emptiness and pain, I am glad I was part of this experience, and I would gladly do it all over again. It was honestly one of the most unique experiences I ever had with a video game, and I am glad I was there to finally witness the end of the story, even if it did not end in the best way. Because I know for sure that I will never see nuclear disarmament being achieved for real. And I now know for sure that I may never know what Kojima's original plan for the Phantom Pain was. But somehow, I feel that this is better than hope that carries uncertainty within it, because this is where I finally managed to move on and get real closure, even if it is impossible to achieve the ambitious goal Kojima envisioned, and even if we may never find out what the Phantom Pain could have been. It may be true that Peace Day never came, but it is also true that, in the end, I was able to make my own peace.